The afternoon sun had turned the porch boards of the Bennett house hot enough to sting through Clara's thin-soled boots. She stood at the edge of the yard with both hands folded at her waist and watched strangers carry away her father's books. The men did not carry them carefully. A crate of Greek histories struck the porch step hard enough to split one corner. A volume slid through the gap and landed in the dust, its leather cover opening like a broken wing. The teamster shoved it back with the toe of his boot. Clara felt the movement in her own ribs. Jeremiah Vane stood beside the auctioneer beneath a square of canvas that gave the two men a patch of shade. His white collar remained stiff despite the heat. Every so often he took out a linen handkerchief, wiped the corners of his mouth, and checked the list in his hand as though the death of a household could be made clean by columns of figures. "Lot 17, the auctioneer called. "Books, maps, papers, 2 crates. "Who gives $5? Someone laughed. Clara kept her face still. 6 months earlier, when her father's cough had become too deep for him to climb the stairs, Vane had arrived with account books, notices, and the patient expression of a man who had already decided what the numbers meant. He had been her father's business agent for years. After the funeral, he became executor. After that, every room in the Bennett house seemed to acquire a price. The horses went first, then the south pasture, then her mother's silver, then the parlor furniture, the walnut clock, the piano no one had tuned since her mother died, now the library. A gust pushed dry alkali dust across the yard. Clara lowered her chin. Ink darkened the skin at the edge of her right thumbnail. She tucked that hand deeper beneath the other. Vane noticed anyway. His eyes passed over her and paused on the stain. He smiled without warmth. Clara looked away before he could say what he had said often enough already, that ink on a woman's hands was proof of vanity, that words made women restless, that a sensible daughter would have learned ledgers only well enough to keep household accounts. The auctioneer reached the last box. It was smaller than the others, built from thin pine and warped by years in the attic. Clara knew what lay beneath the loose papers inside, a school ledger with a cracked black cover. Her father had given it to her when she was 17 because the pages were only half used. She had filled the rest at night, not with household figures, with weather, faces. Bits of conversation overheard at the feed store, the shape of the mountains before a storm, the sound of her mother humming while shelling peas, the way loneliness could settle over a dinner table even when 3 people were seated there. Vane opened the lid and found the ledger. He flipped through 3 pages, his mouth curled. "This?" he said loudly enough for the nearest bidders to hear. "No commercial value." He tossed it onto a heap of torn wrapping paper beside the steps. A few men chuckled, and something inside Clara tightened so hard that for one dizzy second she could not hear the auctioneer. She wanted to cross the yard, pick up the book, and hold it against her chest. She did not move. Vane had spent months teaching her the cost of reaching for anything he had declared worthless. By sunset, the porch was bare. Pale rectangles marked the places where furniture had stood. The walls inside the house looked strangely brighter without paintings and shelves, as though the rooms were embarrassed by their own emptiness. Vane found Clara near her father's former study. "You have the boarding room through Sunday night," he said. She stared at the clean patch on the floor where her father's desk had been. "And Monday? You are 26, Clara. Educated enough to understand circumstances. That is not an answer. It is the only one I am obliged to give." At last she turned toward him. "How much of the debt remains?" His jaw moved once. "A considerable amount. You said the pasture would settle most of it." "Circumstances changed." "What circumstances?" His expression sharpened. "Do not begin." She had learned that phrase too. Do not begin meant do not ask for paper. Do not compare signatures. Do not remember what you saw. Do not force a man to explain a number he preferred to keep vague. Clara looked past him toward the open door. "Was my father truly that far in debt?" Vane folded his list and slid it into his coat. "Your father was a dreamer. Dreamers are expensive." Then he walked away. Clara stayed until his carriage vanished into the dust. Only when the yard was empty did she hurry to the pile beside the steps. The torn paper was there, the broken wrapping twine was there, a bottle with no cork, 2 damp catalogs, a strip of carpet, the black ledger was gone. She searched until the light turned copper, and the mosquitoes found her wrists. Nothing. At the road, someone called her name. Martha Wilkes waited beside a weathered rail fence, with a basket hanging from one arm. She had delivered Clara into the world 26 years earlier, and had buried 2 husbands since then. She wore plain brown, tied her gray hair tight, and had the steady eyes of someone who did not waste pity. "I saw you searching," Martha said. Clara brushed dust from her skirt. It was only a book. Martha looked at her for a long moment. "Then you would not have dirt on both knees." That nearly broke her. Clara turned her face toward the ridge. Evening had softened the mountains from hard brown to violet. High above the settlement, the pines were already dark. Martha set down the basket. "There is a man up there who has asked me twice whether I know a woman willing to marry without romance." Clara gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "I am serious. So am I. That sounds worse than starvation only because I have eaten today. He is a carpenter, Apache. Name is Chaitton. Keeps to the North Ridge. Repairs ranch houses, builds wagons, doors, barns. Reads enough for contracts, hates account books, and needs someone who can keep household figures straight when he takes jobs in the valley. Needs a clerk. He asked for a wife." Clara finally looked at Martha. Martha did not soften the truth. A legal wife gives him protection from men who would otherwise claim he has no proper household. A husband gives you protection from men who think an unmarried woman with no property can be pushed anywhere they please. It is not a love story. It is an arrangement. The word felt ugly. It also felt solid. Why me? Because you can read, because you can keep accounts, because you are not afraid of being alone, and because I have watched Jeremiah Vane look at you like a problem he has not finished solving." Clara's throat tightened. Martha lowered her voice. "Silas Thorne has been asking questions too." That name chilled her more than the evening air. Thorne owned timber leases, water claims, a freight company, and enough favors at the magistrate's office to make ordinary men lower their voices. He had eaten at the Bennett table twice when Clara's father was alive. Both times he had looked at the estate as if measuring boards for a coffin. "What questions? What you own, where you will live. Whether Vane still controls any papers with your signature." Clara's hand closed around the fabric of her skirt. Martha touched her elbow. "I will not tell you Chaitton is gentle. I do not know him well enough. I will tell you he pays what he owes, does not drink himself senseless, and once rebuilt the Nelson widow's roof a snowstorm before he took a cent from her. You could do worse." "I already have." Martha's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Clara looked up at the ridge again. A stranger, a contract, a cabin miles from town. She imagined a narrow bed of rough pine, a stove that smoked, laundry water frozen in the bucket, and a man who expected the labor the law would say a wife owed him. Then she looked back at the empty Bennett house. The decision was not between safety and danger. It was between dangers she understood and one she did not. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if you mean it." Clara breathed through the ache in her chest. "I mean it." The next afternoon she carried one carpet bag to the magistrate's office. She had packed 2 dresses, her mother's hairbrush, 3 handkerchiefs, stockings, a sewing roll, a small Bible she rarely opened, and 6 loose pages she had managed to hide from Vane. The pages were folded inside the lining of the bag. Silas Thorne waited outside the building. He leaned against the hitching rail in a cream-colored coat unsuited to dust. His watch chain flashed when he straightened. "Miss Bennett." Clara stopped 3 paces away. "I hear congratulations are in order." "I have not asked for any." His smile widened. Martha Wilkes has always had a taste for dramatic solutions. She moved toward the steps. Thorne shifted into her path. "I can spare you this. Move. A cabin with an Indian carpenter? You were raised in St. Louis for 6 years. Your father owned more books than this town owns chairs. Whatever else has happened, you are not made for that life." "And what life am I made for?" His eyes traveled over her black dress. "I have a house in the valley. My sister no longer uses the east rooms. You could live there comfortably, help with correspondence, receive guests. No one need speak of debts again." Clara understood the offer because men like Thorne always believed ornament was kinder than ownership if the curtains were expensive. "What would I owe you?" He chuckled. "Must everything be phrased so harshly?" Yes, for the first time, irritation passed over his face. "You would owe gratitude." There it was. Clara stepped around him. He caught the lace at her sleeve between 2 fingers. She stopped. He did not quite touch her skin, but the gesture was intimate enough to feel like trespass. "You are making a mistake," he said. She looked down at his hand until he released the fabric. "Then it will be mine." Inside, the magistrate's office smelled of paper, sweat, and old sealing wax. Chaitton sat at a scarred table near the window. Clara knew him by sight. Everyone did. He came to town for iron, flour, lamp oil, nails, and payment. He was taller than she remembered. broad through the shoulders, his black hair tied at the nape. His shirt was clean but patched at one elbow. Sawdust clung to the seam of one boot. He stood when she entered. He did not smile, neither did she. Martha had already discussed the terms with both of them. Clara would keep accounts, manage household purchases, and have a legal share in earnings accumulated during the marriage. Chaitton would provide shelter, food, and the protection of his household. Either could petition to dissolve the marriage after a year if the arrangement became intolerable. The magistrate dipped his pen. "Miss Bennett, are you entering this contract freely?" Freely was an ambitious word. Clara looked at Chaitton. He met her gaze but did not lean toward her, did not nod, did not try to persuade. She could still walk out. That mattered, yes. The magistrate turned. "Mr. Yazzie?" "Yes." The paper came to Clara first. Her hand was steady until the nib touched the page. A bead of ink gathered near the tip and rolled onto her index finger. She instinctively tried to wipe it on the blotting cloth. Chaitton's eyes shifted to her hand. Clara froze. For one hot second she was back in the Bennett library with Vane holding her wrist beneath a lamp. Black-stained claws. She expected amusement. Chaitton only watched the way she held the pen. Then his gaze moved to the signature she had made. He signed beneath it in a firm, careful hand. Outside, when the document was sealed, Silas Thorne was gone. Chaitton lifted Clara's carpetbag into the wagon without asking to inspect it. The team started north. The settlement fell away behind them, first into a row of roofs, then a brown smear, then nothing but a shallow basin beneath the mountains. For the first mile, neither spoke. Clara held the edge of the seat while the wagon climbed. At last she said, "Martha said you need someone to manage accounts." "I do. I can keep household books, too. Food, supplies, hired labor." He nodded. "I can cook. I sew. I know how to preserve fruit. The north wheel is going to drop." "What?" The wagon lurched. The left front wheel slid into loose shale, tipping them toward a steep cut in the trail. Clara grabbed the seat with both hands. One horse screamed and pulled sideways. Chaitton did not curse. He braced one boot against the board, shortened the reins, and spoke to the team in a low voice. The horses leaned. The wheel struck stone, skidded, then climbed. The wagon slammed level. For several seconds, Clara could hear only the blood in her ears. Chaitton loosened the reins again. "The mountain decides the order of work," he said. She stared at him. He glanced toward the clouds gathering beyond the ridge. "Today roof first, horses second, supper third. Accounts tomorrow." It was such a practical answer to a question she had not known she was asking that Clara almost laughed. Instead, she looked ahead. Rain scented the wind. For the first time since the auction, she was moving toward a place Jeremiah Vane had not chosen for her. She did not know yet whether that place would become another cage. But the road beneath the wagon wheels belonged to no ledger she had ever seen. The rain reached them before the cabin did. It began as 3 dark spots on the wagon board, then 10, then a hard scatter that struck Clara's hat brim and released the smell of dust from the trail. Chaitton urged the horses through the last bend. The temperature dropped so quickly that Clara's damp sleeves turned cold against her forearms. The cabin stood on a shelf of granite above a narrow valley of pine and juniper. It was larger than she had imagined, not pretty but deliberate. The logs were squared. The roof had a steep pitch. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a workshop leaned against the back under its own roof. Near the barn, stacks of timber sat beneath canvas. Chaitton pulled the wagon beneath the eave. "Inside," he said. "What about the horses? I have them. I can help. You can help by getting dry." The words were blunt but not contemptuous. Clara climbed down. The main room smelled of cedar smoke, old coffee, clean wool, and the faint sweetness of pine resin. A cast-iron stove sat near the wall. There was a table, 2 chairs, shelves, a washstand, and pegs for coats. Nothing matched, but every piece had been built to last. A narrow doorway opened into a bedroom. Clara looked toward it before she could stop herself. Chaitton carried her bag inside, set it beside the doorway, and went back out into the rain. She stood alone. The bedroom contained a cedar chest, a peg rail, and a thick pallet of folded blankets. No bed. Clara stepped inside. The floor was swept. The window had been fitted carefully enough that almost no rain came through the frame. Someone had left a pitcher of water on the chest and a clean towel folded beside it. Still, there was no bed. Relief rose first. Then humiliation. She had prepared herself for the certainty of duty. She had spent the entire climb rehearsing how to endure the first night without making herself small enough to disappear forever. Instead, there was an empty room. Perhaps he regretted the marriage already. Perhaps Martha had exaggerated his need. Perhaps he had married her only because a legal household strengthened some claim to the land and intended to tolerate her as a clerk. Clara pressed her palm against the cool lid of the cedar chest. It was absurd that rejection should hurt after she had feared possession. Yet both feelings came from the same old lesson. Her worth must be measured by what a man wanted from her. The door opened in the main room. Chaitton entered with rain running from his hair onto his collar. He hung his coat and carried a dented pot to the stove. "There is stew, Sit," he said. "It needs heating." Clara went at once. "I can do that." He looked at her wet cuffs. "You can change first." "I am capable of stirring a pot while damp." "I did not say you weren't." The answer stopped her. He lit the stove, added 2 pieces of wood, and set the pot over the heat himself. Clara changed. When she returned, he had placed bread on the table and poured water into 2 tin cups. He had also changed into a dry shirt. The rain drummed on the roof hard enough to blur the edges of silence. She sat. He served the stew. It contained beans, salted pork, onion, and something green she could not identify. "You cooked this?" "Yes." "Martha said you needed a wife to keep your hearth." "Martha says many things." Despite herself, Clara smiled. It vanished quickly, but Chaitton saw it. He did not comment. Halfway through the meal, Clara's spoon slipped from her fingers and struck the floor. The sound cracked through the room. She flinched so hard that her knee hit the underside of the table. Chaitton stopped eating. Clara bent quickly. "Sorry." The word came out before she touched the spoon. She waited for irritation. Vane's disgust had often begun with a sigh. Her father, in his last ill-tempered months, had sometimes snapped over spilled tea or a mislaid paper. Clara had become skilled at reading the first small weather changes in a man's face. Chaitton's face did not change. "It fell," he said. She picked up the spoon. "Yes." He reached to the shelf, took another, and set it beside her bowl. "That one is clean." Then he continued eating. Clara stared at the new spoon. It was such a small kindness that she mistrusted it more than a grand one. After supper, she carried the dishes to the basin. "You do not have to do those tonight," Chaitton said. "I ate from them." "So did I." She looked over her shoulder. "Do you intend to argue over dishwater?" "No." "Good." He almost smiled. She washed, he dried. The storm weakened near midnight. Clara lay on the wool pallet listening to the last water drip from the eaves. Then a different sound began. Shk, pause. Shk, pause. Steel over wood. She sat up. Light showed beneath the bedroom door. In the main room, the stove had burned low. The sound came from the workshop. Clara crossed the covered passage and stopped in the doorway. Chaitton stood at his bench beneath a lantern, pushing a hand plane along a pale board. A thin curl of wood rose from the blade and spiraled to the floor. Shh! He reset his grip. Shh! The workshop was dense with scent. Cedar, oil, iron, damp leather. Tools hung from pegs in careful order. Squares, saws, chisels, augers, mallets. Boards were stacked by thickness along one wall. Clara watched. The town spoke of Chaitton as though his trade were some unusual accident, that an Apache man had learned to make white men's doors and bedsteads. Standing there, Clara understood how foolish the phrase was. He did not merely know tools. He knew material. His hands read the direction of grain before the blade touched it. He worked around knots instead of fighting them. Every movement had been practiced long enough to look quiet. The piece on the bench was too short for a bed rail. Beside it lay 4 twisted lengths of juniper, their natural curves preserved. "What are you making?" she asked. He looked up. "You should sleep." "That was not my question." "No." She waited. He ran his thumb across the plain board. "It will be ready in the morning." "For whom?" "For the house." He returned to work. Clara stayed another minute, irritated by the answer and fascinated by the sound. Then she went back to the pallet. She fell asleep counting the strokes of the plane. At dawn she woke to dragging. Not furniture scraping across the bedroom floor. Something heavier moved in the main room. Clara pulled on stockings, buttoned her dress, and opened the door. A desk stood beneath the west-facing window. For several seconds she simply looked at it. The top was a broad slab of pine, pale gold in the morning light. The legs were not square posts, but the twisted juniper pieces she had seen in the workshop, fitted so cunningly that their natural bends supported the weight without looking tamed. A small drawer sat beneath the right edge. Along the back, Chaitton had carved a shallow groove wide enough to hold pens. There was also a chair. He stood near the stove, pouring coffee. Clara crossed the room slowly. Her fingers hovered over the desktop before touching it. The surface was smoother than any table in the Bennett house had been. He had sanded beyond simple usefulness. It was a surface meant for paper. She looked around. No bed rails, no headboard, no mattress frame. Only the desk. What is this? Chaitton set down the coffee pot. A desk. I can see that. The light stays longest at that window. She stared at him. He took a sip of coffee. I thought you said you needed help with accounts. I do. Then why not a ledger table in the kitchen? Because this is not for my accounts. Her palm flattened on the pine. A faint tremor ran through her hand. How did you know? He looked at her fingers. The ink stain from the magistrate's office was still visible near her nail. You hold a pen like a person who misses it. Clara pulled her hand back. The movement was so fast it embarrassed her. Chaitton said nothing. Anger rose to cover the embarrassment. You have built a desk in a house without a bed. Yes. You married yesterday. Yes. And you thought this was the first thing a wife needed? His gaze stayed steady. I thought it was the first thing you needed. She laughed once, sharply. You do not know me. No. Then do not pretend you do. I am not pretending. The calmness of his voice made her angrier. She pointed toward the bedroom. I came here prepared to keep your house. I know what an arrangement means. I know what everyone in that town assumes. Yet you put me on the floor and build this. The pallet is thick. That is not the point. No, you have no idea what the point is. Then tell me. Clara opened her mouth. Nothing came. How could she explain that the bed frightened her, but the absence of it made her feel unwanted? That the desk was worse because it asked for a part of her she had buried intentionally? That domestic labor had at least rules while freedom was a room with no walls? She looked at the desk. The polished pine accused her. I am not a schoolgirl, she said. I do not need toys. Chaitton's expression changed then, barely. Not hurt, something closer to disappointment. I do not spend nights making toys. He took his coat from the peg. The north fence needs repair. There is bread in the tin. The coffee is hot. He opened the door. Clara spoke before he stepped out. And the bed? He looked back. When it means rest, then he left. For the rest of the morning, Clara refused to sit at the desk. She swept the floor, she cleaned the stove, she sorted flour, beans, dried apples, salt pork, coffee, and cornmeal. She counted jars. She mended the torn cuff of one of Chaitton's shirts without permission. By noon, she had reorganized the shelf twice. The desk remained beneath the window. Sunlight moved across it. At last she went outside. The porch boards were dusty from the storm. Mud had dried in pale streaks near the steps. Clara fetched a bucket, soap, a stiff brush, and a scoop of sand. She knelt. The first strokes were satisfying. Bristles scraped across wood. Dirty water ran off the edge. Her shoulders warmed with effort. This she understood. A floor could be made clean. A shirt could be mended. Beans could be counted. Bread could rise or fail according to rules. A blank page had no rules except truth. She scrubbed harder. By the time the sun reached the center of the sky, sweat had soaked the back of her dress. Her knees hurt through her skirt. The brush handle rubbed one knuckle raw. She did not stop. When she saw blood on the wood, she poured more water over it and kept scrubbing. A horse snorted behind her. Clara looked up. Chaitton stood at the edge of the porch with two fence rails over one shoulder. His gaze went from her face to the bucket, then to her hands. He lowered the rails. The porch was clean. It was not. It was. There was mud. There will be mud again. She turned back to the board. His hand closed around the brush. Clara jerked. He released it immediately. The brush stayed between them. I'm not taking your hand, he said. I'm taking the brush. Her breath came too fast. He waited. Slowly, Clara loosened her grip. Chaitton put the brush in the bucket. Come inside. I can finish. No, you said you did not want a servant. Now you order me. Yes. The blunt admission startled her. Why? Because you are bleeding on clean wood. For one absurd instant, she wanted to laugh and cry together. He carried the bucket inside. Clara followed because her hands had begun to shake. At the washstand, he poured warm water into the basin. He opened a small tin that smelled of beeswax, pine resin, and something herbal. Hands. I can tend them. I know. She held them out anyway. He did not seize her wrists. He waited for her to place her hands above the basin herself. The water stung. Clara hissed. Chaitton washed grit from the cracked skin with a soft cloth. His hands were much rougher than hers, yet the pressure was careful. Why? He asked. Why what? Why scrub until skin comes off? The porch needed cleaning. No. She looked at the wall. He waited. That was becoming a habit of his she found unbearable. At last she said, I need to be useful. You keep saying that. Because it is true. To whom? To this house. A house is wood. To you. His hands stopped. I came with nothing. You feed me. You gave me your name. You. My name was not expensive. To me it was. He set the cloth down. Did Vane make you work until you bled? No. Did he make you believe you should? Clara pulled her hands back. The question had gone too close. Chaitton did not pursue it. He pushed the tin toward her. Salve twice today. She stared at it. And the desk? He looked toward the window. It will still be there tomorrow. What if I never use it? Then I made a poor guess. That answer wounded her more gently than insistence would have. She expected him to say she must write. He gave her the possibility of refusing. After he returned to the fence, Clara sat at the kitchen table with her bandaged hands in her lap. Late light spread across the desk. She went to it once, opened the drawer. Inside lay 3 sharpened pens, a packet of paper, and nothing else. No demand, no note, no instruction. Clara closed the drawer and walked away. 2 days passed before Chaitton rode into the valley again. Clara did not ask why. He left before sunrise with 2 finished window frames tied to the wagon and returned near dusk with flour, lamp oil, a coil of rope, and a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She was kneading bread when he set the bundle on the writing desk. The soft thump made her look up. Chaitton unwrapped it. The cracked black cover appeared first. Clara's hands sank into the dough. Flour clung to her wrists as she crossed the room. My ledger. The book looked worse than it had at the auction. One corner was crushed. A hoof had left a crescent of dried mud across the back. Several pages were torn at the edges, but it was hers. She touched the cover with 2 fingers. Where? Behind the auction stable. You went back for this? I was already in town. That is not what I asked. He met her eyes. No. Clara's throat tightened. How did you know it mattered? I saw you look for it. At the auction? Yes. You were there? Buying hinges from Miller. I saw Vane throw it away. Clara opened the book. Her father's old arithmetic filled the first half in his narrow handwriting. After that came her pages. She turned too quickly, checking for gaps. The mountain shadows were still there. Her mother shelling peas. A rainstorm in St. Louis. A paragraph about a woman at the train station whose red gloves looked like 2 small flags against winter. She found one missing leaf, then another. Still, most had survived. Chaitton placed a second object on the desk, a square iron inkwell. It was heavy, plain, and black. Clara stared at it. You bought that too? Yes, why? The pens are useless without ink. Something hot pressed behind her eyes. She hated crying in front of men. Tears had too often been treated as proof that the argument was over and the woman had lost. She picked up the ledger instead. You spend money strangely. So I have been told. She looked at him. Thank you. He nodded once and went to unhitch the horses. Clara stood by the desk until the bread dough began to dry on her hands. That evening she cleaned the ledger cover with a damp cloth. Then she sat. The chair fit the height of the desk exactly. Chaitton had measured her somehow, perhaps from the magistrate's chair, perhaps by eye. The realization made her strangely self-conscious. She opened to a blank page. The pen waited. Outside, Chaitton split wood. Thunk, a pause thunk. Clara dipped the nib. The smell of iron gall ink rose from the well. Her hand froze. Memory came not as an image, but as heat. She was 19 again in her father's library. Jeremiah Vane stood beside the hearth holding a school ledger she had hidden behind a row of legal commentaries. He had discovered 3 pages describing one of his meetings with Silas Thorne. Not accusations, observations. Thorne arrived after midnight. Father did not come downstairs. Mr. Vane opened the deed chest. Mr. Thorne brought 2 witnesses I did not recognize. A woman's description of a suspicious hour had frightened him more than any accusation. Vane had read the lines, then held Clara's stained fingers under the lamp. Look at these hands, he had said. A lady's hands ruined by soot and vanity. He tore the pages out. Later he burned them. Clara had told no one. Now the black inkwell sat before her like the same night made solid. She put down the pen. The next morning she tried again, nothing. On the 3rd day she wrote a grocery list at the desk just to prove the surface could hold ordinary words. Flour, coffee, salt, lamp oil. Her pulse raced anyway. Chaitton came in carrying a split pine board. He saw the list. Clara expected him to glance away. Instead, he said, "We have salt." "I know." "Then why write it?" "Practice." He considered that. "Put nails on the list." She looked up. "We need nails?" "Always." A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. She wrote nails. That became the first page she kept. Not because it was important, but because nothing terrible happened after she wrote it. A week later, she began recording household accounts. Then Chaitton's jobs, then weather. October 3, frost on the north side of the water bucket, 1 hinge order for the Nelson barn. Chaitton undercharged again. He read that last line upside down from across the table. I charged what the work was worth. You charged what the widow could pay. Same thing, no. That is why you need me. He looked at her for several seconds. Maybe. The answer pleased her more than it should have. Their days found a shape. Chaitton rose before light. Clara woke when she heard the stove door open. Sometimes he made coffee, sometimes she did. They ate eggs when the hens laid, cornmeal when they did not, salted meat when work was heavy, and apples cooked soft with cinnamon when Clara wanted the cabin to smell like a childhood that had never truly existed. She learned where the roof collected snow. He learned she hated onions cut too thick. She learned he repaired tools the night before he needed them. He learned she left books open face down and disapproved by building her a narrow brass bookmark rather than scolding her. They still slept separately. Clara on the pallet in the bedroom, Chaitton on a narrow cot in the workshop. The empty space where a bed should be stopped feeling like accusation. Then Jeremiah Vane rode up the ridge. Clara knew his horse before she saw his face. The animal's shoes struck stone too hard, pushed by a rider who believed speed could make the mountain submit. She was in the small garden beside the porch, rinsing mint roots in a basin. Vane came straight across the planted row. His horse crushed 2 rosemary bushes. The smell burst into the air. Clara stood. "Move your horse." Vane looked down at her. "So this is where you have been hidden. Move your horse." He smiled and let the animal take another step. A mint plant disappeared beneath the hoof. Clara's hands went cold. The workshop door opened. Chaitton walked out carrying a wood plane. He looked first at Clara, then at the garden, then at Vane. No expression crossed his face, but the horse felt something. Its ears flattened, it shifted backward. Vane pulled the reins. "I have come to check on Mrs. Yazzy's welfare." "You have seen it," Chaitton said. Vane blinked, perhaps surprised to hear him speak so soon. "I have business inside." "No." The single word hung between them. Vane dismounted anyway. "I served as executor of the Bennett estate. Certain documents remain unsettled." Clara wiped wet hands on her apron. "What documents?" "Private matters." "Then speak privately to me." His eyes narrowed. "I would prefer a table." Chaitton remained between him and the porch. Clara surprised herself. "Let him in." Chaitton turned his head slightly. She nodded. "I want to hear what he says." Only then did Chaitton step aside. Vane entered as if inspecting a property seized for taxes. His gaze moved over the stove, shelves, table, and clean floor. Then he saw the desk. He stopped. The ink-stained ledger lay open beneath the window. Clara had been copying expenses before going outside. For a moment, Vane's face lost all composure. Then he laughed. "A writing desk." Clara said nothing. He walked toward it. "So this is the great domestic arrangement?" "No parlor, no proper bed, I assume, but a desk." He reached for the chair. Chaitton put one hand on its back. Vane stopped. "The chair stays." Vane looked at him. The two men stood close enough that Clara could smell Vane's lavender pomade over the cedar scent of Chaitton's shirt. Vane tried to laugh again. "You misunderstand me." "No, I merely wish to sit." "Sit there." Chaitton indicated the kitchen table. Vane did not move. His eyes returned to the ledger. "What have you been writing, Clara? Accounts? Household accounts?" "Some." He looked too quickly at her. That confirmed what Chaitton had said without words. The book frightened him. Vane pulled a folded paper from his coat. "There is a remaining obligation from your father's estate." Clara did not take it. "What obligation?" "A note secured against timber rights north of the Bennett tract. Your father co-signed." "My father never owned northern timber rights, indirectly. That word does much work for you." His mouth flattened. She held out her hand. "Give me the paper." He hesitated. Then he passed it over. Clara read. The language was dense, but the dates were clear. The alleged note had been signed 3 weeks after her father became too ill to leave his bed. The witness was Silas Thorne's bookkeeper. The second witness was a man Clara remembered seeing at the Bennett house after midnight. Her heartbeat changed. "Where is the original?" "With counsel." "Who notarized it?" "The magistrate's predecessor. He died 2 years before this date." Vane's face went still. Clara felt the room sharpen around her. She looked at Chaitton. He had not moved, but his attention had narrowed. Vane reached for the paper. Clara folded it once. "No, that is not yours. It names my father. It is a copy. Then you do not need this copy." Clara, for years her name in his mouth had been a command. This time it sounded like fear. She crossed to the writing desk and placed the paper beside the iron inkwell. Vane followed one step. Chaitton moved between them, not fast, not threateningly, simply there. Vane stopped. "You have encouraged this," he said to Chaitton. "You do not understand what kind of woman you have brought into your house." Chaitton looked at Clara's desk. "I do." She will make trouble from shadows. She always has. Clara's pulse pounded in her fingertips. Why are you afraid of my shadows, Jeremiah? His face reddened. I am trying to protect you from consequences. You sold my home. Your father's debt sold your home. Then show me all of them. He said nothing. Every note, every deed, every payment. You have no standing. I have a memory. That landed. Vane looked at the ledger again. Clara saw the exact moment he understood that her writing had not begun with this marriage. He backed toward the door. This mountain has made you foolish. No, she said. It has made you easier to hear. Outside, Chaitton walked Vane to his horse. Clara remained by the desk. She could not hear most of what passed between them. Then Chaitton's voice carried through the open door. The trail is bad after dark. Vane mounted. If you value your contracts, Carpenter, you will teach your wife discretion. Chaitton rested one hand on the porch rail. If you value your teeth, you will speak to my wife as though she is standing here. Vane looked toward the doorway. Clara was. He rode away. The ruined rosemary lay crushed in the yard. Chaitton returned with a bucket of water. Together they lifted the plants, packed damp soil around the roots, and tied the bent stems to splints made from thin cedar. Neither said much. Near sunset, Clara asked, Do you think they will live? Chaitton pressed earth around the last plant. Some branches will die. That was not what I asked. He looked at the small green stems. The roots are still there. That night, Clara took the copied note from the desk drawer. She opened the ledger. Her hand trembled when she dipped the pen. Then she wrote the date of Vane's visit. Under it, she wrote every word she could remember. The horse in the rosemary, the false note, the dead notary, the witness. Vane's face when she asked for the original. She wrote until the lamp burned low. At the bottom of the page, without planning to, she added one sentence. I was taught that memory was dangerous only when it belonged to a woman. She stared at the line. Then she turned the page and kept going. The weather closed around the ridge 3 nights later. All afternoon the sky had been the color of old pewter. Chaitton returned early from a barn repair with the team sweating despite the cold. He unharnessed before supper, stacked extra wood beneath the porch, and checked every shutter twice. Clara watched him from the window. You expect snow? Rain first. Maybe ice. The air is not cold enough. It will be. She had learned not to argue with his weather. By dark the wind had found the chimney. It came down in long, hollow breaths that pushed smoke into the room and rattled the stove lid. Rain struck the roof sideways. The windows trembled in their frames. Chaitton laid a wet blanket at the base of the door to stop the draft. Clara lit a second lamp. The storm made the cabin feel both small and safe. There was nowhere to pretend not to notice the other person. Chaitton pulled a low stool near the hearth and sharpened a chisel. Clara sat at the writing desk. For 10 minutes she did nothing. Then she opened the ledger to a fresh page. She thought of what Chaitton had said about roots. She wrote one word, Elizabeth. Her mother's name, the nib scratched softly. Clara stared at it. She had not written the name in years. Elizabeth Bennett had been quiet, beautiful, efficient, and so skilled at making herself agreeable that no one had noticed how unhappy she was until illness had made unhappiness irrelevant. She had kept a perfect pantry and an immaculate table. She had embroidered linen no one used. She had apologized when her husband raised his voice. Clara wrote about her mother shelling peas. Not about death, not yet. About the green pod snapping under her thumb. About the peas striking a china bowl. About the way she had hummed the same 4 notes and never seemed to know the rest of the song. The storm shook the house. Chaitton's sharpening stopped. Clara looked over her shoulder. He was watching the page from too far away to read it. What? Nothing. That is rarely true. His mouth moved at one corner. He resumed sharpening. Clara looked back at the name. Then she wrote another paragraph. After Elizabeth came Edward, her father. Not as the frail man at the end, and not as the romantic scholar everyone in town remembered, but as he had actually been, generous, distracted, proud, capable of loving books more consistently than people. Then Jeremiah Vane. The pen dug harder. Clara wrote what she remembered, not what she could prove. She marked uncertain details with questions in the margin. Midnight meeting, year? Deed chest opened. 2 witnesses. Thorne present. Father upstairs ill. Vane burned pages next day. The work changed as she wrote. Fear became sequence. Sequence became pattern. Vane had not merely despised her writing. He had feared records. She opened the false note he had left and copied every name. The storm boomed so hard that a cup rattled off the shelf and broke. Clara jumped. Chaitton stood immediately, but not because of her. He checked the window latch, then the chimney, then the roof line through the glass. "Sit," he said. "I am sitting." "Good." She almost smiled. A leak appeared near the back wall. They set a basin beneath it. Water began to tick into the tin. Clara returned to the desk. After another page, she asked, "Why did you build here?" Chaitton's chisel stopped moving. She had asked about nails, weather, timber, horses, invoices, and hinges. She had never asked about him. He looked at the fire. "This was my uncle's hunting ground." Was, before the survey lines. Clara waited. He rubbed the stone along the blade once, twice. "My father was moved south when he was young. Later he came back north for work. He taught me where the water sits under the rock, where juniper grows slow, where pine splits clean." Did he build? Not furniture, corals, roofs. Anything someone paid him to make. Chaitton set the chisel across his knees. "When I was 12, a government agent told him the place he had been born was not ours because the paper said so. My father asked the man if paper had ever drunk from that spring." Clara breathed out slowly. "What happened?" The paper won. No bitterness colored the sentence. That made it heavier. "My father died believing a map was stronger than memory." The fire popped. Chaitton looked toward the desk. "I do not." Clara understood. "You build so things stay." "Yes." "And the desk?" He met her eyes. "You were disappearing." The simple words hurt more than pity. She looked down at her hands. "I thought you wanted a wife for the accounts." "I wanted a household that the law would recognize." "That sounds nearly as romantic as Martha." "I am not romantic." "No." Another corner of his mouth moved. Then he added, "I also wanted someone who could tell when a man was cheating me in numbers." "That I can do." "And I know how you corrected the magistrate." "I corrected a date." He did not like it. "That is not proof of intelligence. It is proof of useful courage." Clara looked back at the page before he could see how deeply the remark landed. The rain turned to sleet after midnight. They remained awake because the roof groaned under wind. Chaitton worked near the fire. Clara wrote. There were no declarations, no promises, no sudden transformation, only two kinds of labor in the same room. By morning the page held 6 years of memory. The storm left ice in the shadows and branches across the trail. Chaitton slept for 3 hours after dawn. Clara covered him with a wool blanket while he was still in the workshop chair. He did not wake. She returned to the desk and began comparing dates. For the first time, she noticed that several of her father's supposed notes had been executed during periods, when he was bedridden. One bore a witness signature Clara recognized from a Thorn freight office receipt. Another referenced a parcel her father had sold years earlier. She created columns: date, document, witness, inconsistency, memory. The work stopped being confession and became investigation. When Chaitton woke, she had filled 4 pages. He stood behind the kitchen table, not the desk, and drank cold coffee. Your face says you found something. My face does not say anything. It does. She frowned at him. He waited. She held up the false note. I think Vane and Thorn manufactured at least part of my father's debt. Chaitton set down the cup. Think? I need originals. Where? County records. Maybe the old freight books. The Bennett papers are mostly gone. Who bought them? I don't know. He looked toward the window. Martha might. Clara hesitated. Martha is afraid of paper. She is afraid of men. That is not the same thing. No. He went to the peg for his coat. Where are you going? To split the ice from the water trough. I thought you were going to town. Trail is bad. I can wait. He paused. Clara heard what she had said. Months earlier, waiting would have meant helplessness. Now it meant planning. 2 days later, when the trail cleared, they rode to the settlement together. Clara wore her plain brown dress and carried a list of document dates inside her glove. People looked. Some stared at Chaitton. Others stared at Clara. Several looked from one to the other and whispered. Clara had expected shame. What she felt instead was annoyance. At the records office, the clerk tried to tell her old mortgage books were unavailable. Clara smiled. I know exactly which volume I need. Mrs. Yazzie, those are official records. That is why I am here. You cannot simply inspect. Chaitton set a paid tax receipt on the counter. The clerk glanced at it, then at him. Then at Clara. Clara leaned closer. Volume 6. Property liens. Years 78 through 82. The clerk sighed with theatrical suffering and fetched the book. Clara spent 2 hours reading. She found 3 entries connected to the Bennett estate. 2 had been amended. One amendment carried the initials St. Silas Thorn. The clerk refused to let her copy the original page, so Clara copied every line by hand. Chaitton sat on a bench near the door and repaired a cracked harness strap while he waited. He never asked how much longer. At the freight office, they had less luck. The current manager claimed old books had been discarded. Martha met them outside the general store. Her eyes went immediately to the folded papers in Clara's hand. "You are stirring things." They were already stirred. "Jeremiah was in town yesterday, telling people your husband has filled your head with grievances." Clara glanced at Chaitton. "He has barely filled my head with conversation." Martha did not laugh. "This is not a joke. Silas Thorne owns half the men who wear badges in this county. Then perhaps the other half can read." Martha gripped her arm. "Clara, listen to me. There are ways to survive. Making yourself visible is not one of them. The old Clara would have heard wisdom. The new one heard exhaustion. Is that how you survived?" Martha's face closed. Clara regretted the sharpness immediately. "Martha, my husband burned my school books after we married," Martha said. The street noise seemed to recede. "He said a woman who read too much neglected useful work. I hid one book for 7 years in the flour barrel. When he found it, he tore it page by page and made me sweep the pieces." Clara could think of nothing to say. Martha looked at the papers in her hand. "I am trying to keep you from learning what men do when they are embarrassed by a woman." Clara took Martha's fingers. "I learned." Martha's eyes filled. Clara lowered her voice. "And I also learned what happens when no one writes it down." They stood that way beside sacks of seed and a stack of empty apple crates while townspeople passed. At last Martha said, "Your father's auction papers were bought by Silas Thorne's clerk." Clara's breath caught. "All of them?" "Most. But the auctioneer kept duplicate lot sheets. He drinks at the Copper Bell on Thursdays. It was Thursday. They found him before supper." The auctioneer remembered the Bennett sale because Vane had argued over fees. For $2 and a promise not to mention his name, he let Clara inspect a duplicate list. Lot 23. Estate correspondence and commercial ledgers. By H. Pike. Henry Pike was Silas Thorne's bookkeeper. Clara copied it. On the way back to the ridge, wind lifted dust along the trail. Chaitton drove. Clara held the papers inside her coat. "We need more. Yes. You agree? Yes. You do not even know what I am going to say. You said we need more." She looked at him. "I need a witness who knew my father could not sign those later notes." "Doctor, dead. Servant, scattered. Martha?" Clara considered. She delivered his medicines, then asked. The wagon climbed. After a while, Clara said, "You are building something else in the workshop." "Yes, large. Yes. Is it finally the bed?" "No." She stared at him. "What is it?" "A document chest." Clara blinked. "For the papers?" "Yes." "And after that?" "Maybe shelves." Chaitton. He looked ahead, innocent in a way she did not believe. "What? Do you intend to build every object in the house before the bed?" "Not every object." "How generous." His low laugh surprised both of them. It was the first time she had heard it. Clara carried the sound with her all the way home. Martha came to the cabin the following Sunday with a sack of flour, a jar of preserved peaches, and fear pressed into every line of her face. She had ridden alone. Clara knew before the woman removed her gloves that the visit was not social. Chaitton was in the workshop fitting brass corners to the document chest. He greeted Martha with a nod and returned to his work. Martha set the peaches on the table. Her gaze found the writing desk. The ledger lay open. 2 copied deeds sat beneath a stone paperweight. The iron inkwell caught the winter light. Martha crossed the room and threw her dishcloth over the papers. Clara stared. "What are you doing?" "Covering trouble." "Martha, Jeremiah was at the mercantile yesterday. Silas Thorne, too. They know you were in the record books." Clara took hold of the cloth. Martha caught her wrist. "Leave it." "No." "Girl, you have no idea how ugly this can become." "I have some idea." "No, you do not." Men like Thorne do not lose politely. They take water. They cancel freight. They lean on judges. They send 3 men to explain what one paper failed to make clear. Chaitton's hammer stopped in the workshop. Martha glanced toward the sound. "Do not make him fight a war, because you cannot let old grievances lie." Clara felt the sting. She pulled the cloth away from the desk. "These are not old grievances." She lifted the false note. "This claims my father signed a debt when he could barely lift a spoon." Martha's face changed. Clara continued. "This deed amendment gives Thorne timber rights my father never owned. The witness is his own bookkeeper. Vane brought it here because he expected me to accept his explanation." Martha sat. The room went very quiet. Clara softened her voice. "You said you delivered father's medicines." "I did." "Do you remember the last month?" "Too well." "Could he sign his name?" Martha looked at her hands. Some days he could not hold the cup. "Would you write that down?" Martha's head snapped up. "No." "Why?" "Because I am not a witness in one of your stories." This is not a story. That makes it worse. Clara sat across from her. I will write the statement. You can read it. If it is wrong, I change it. If it is right, you can sign or refuse. Martha stood abruptly. No, she pulled her shawl around herself. I brought flour, that is all. She walked to the door. Clara did not stop her. At the threshold, Martha turned toward the desk. Her eyes stayed on the black ink for a long moment. Then she left. Chaitton resumed hammering. Clara sat without writing. After a while, he came in carrying the document chest. It was cedar, iron-banded, and plain. He placed it beneath the desk. She will come back, he said. How do you know? She left the peaches. Clara looked at the jar. Martha always took empty jars home. 3 days later, she returned. This time, she brought no food. She stood beside the stove while Clara wrote her statement in a careful hand. I, Martha Wilkes, attended Edward Bennett during the final weeks of his illness. They went line by line. Martha corrected the date of one fever. She added that she had seen Vane carry papers into the bedroom twice, and that Edward had refused to sign one because he could not read it without his spectacles. Did you see what happened after? Vane came out angry. Did father sign later? I don't know. Clara wrote exactly that. No embroidery, no assumption. At the end, Martha read the statement twice. Her hand shook when she signed. Clara sprinkled sand over the wet ink. Martha watched it dry. I feel foolish. You are brave. No. Martha put on her gloves. Do not make it prettier than it is. I am terrified. Clara nodded. Then you are terrified and you signed anyway. Martha considered that. Yes. Chaitton placed the signed statement in the cedar chest. He locked it. That evening he began a new project. Clara heard the first saw cuts while she copied Martha's testimony. The wood was pine, long boards, heavy posts. She did not ask. For several nights the frame grew in the workshop. Chaitton mortised joints, cut rails, shaped posts, and carved a simple band of juniper leaves across one board. He never announced what it was. Clara pretended not to know. The bed no longer frightened her in the same way. That frightened her differently. She had spent weeks believing the absence of a bed meant he did not want her. Now she understood that he had been waiting for the word want to belong to both of them. One evening, while he planed a rail, she stood in the workshop doorway. Why now? He did not look up. You are sleeping badly. That was true before. Yes, what changed? He set down the plane. You stopped asking what you owe. Clara leaned against the frame. I still owe you. No for food. You keep the accounts. You live in it. For protection. His gaze sharpened. You stood between Thorne's papers and this land before I did. That is not the same as standing between a gun and me. No, it is better, she frowned. He picked up the plane again. A gun stops one man. The blade whispered over pine. Paper can stop the reason he came. Clara looked toward the cabin, where the cedar chest held copies of forged notes and Martha's signed testimony. Maybe. Maybe is enough to work with. A week later, the maybe arrived on horseback. Silas Thorne rode up with 5 men. The afternoon was bright and cold. Snow still clung in the shadow of the north wall. Chaitton was setting a new hinge on the barn door. Clara was inside reviewing the land records. The riders stopped in a half-circle beyond the porch. Thorne wore a dark coat and no smile. One of his men carried a survey tube. Another had a shotgun across his saddle. Chaitton laid down the hinge. Clara came to the door. Thorne removed a rolled document. I have come to resolve a trespass. Chaitton said nothing. Thorne opened the paper. The northern slope has been resurveyed. Timber used in this cabin and workshop was harvested inside a company claim. Clara stepped onto the porch. Which company? Thorne looked at her as though noticing an insect. High Mesa Timber and Freight, owned by you, owned by shareholders. Whose names? His eyes hardened. This is not your concern. It concerns the wood under my feet. One hired man shifted. Thorne ignored him. The restitution deed transfers the disputed parcel and a small adjacent tract in settlement. Sign it, Yazzie, and I will not pursue damages. Chaitton finally spoke. No. Thorne's nostrils flared. You have not read it. No. Clara held out her hand. I will. Thorne laughed. No. Then you do not want a signature. You want surrender. His face reddened. He tossed the paper onto the porch. Clara picked it up. The legal description included the spring north of the cabin. Her stomach dropped. Without that spring, the household could not keep livestock through summer. She read the survey date, then the filing date. The filing date was yesterday. This claim is new. Thorne's smile returned. Claims become clear when competent surveyors do their work. The county book we inspected last week shows no northern extension. Then the county book is behind, or this paper is ahead. One man coughed to hide a laugh. Thorne turned on him. Silence returned. Clara looked at Chaitton. His face remained unreadable, but she knew him now. The stillness meant calculation. Thorne rolled his shoulders. 24 hours, Clara asked, to sign. And if he does not? Thorne's gaze moved to the cabin. Wood burns. The words were soft. That made them worse. Chaitton stepped forward. 2 hired men reached toward their holsters. Clara moved off the porch and stood beside him. Thorne looked almost pleased. There, you see? I came to offer a legal solution, and the carpenter threatens violence. He has said nothing, Clara replied. His kind does not need words. The insult struck the yard like a stone. Chaitton did not react. Clara did. Say another word like that, and I will write it down exactly as you said it. Thorne stared at her. Then his eyes moved to the ink stain on her thumb. Understanding passed across his face. Vane had told him, You think your little notebook makes you dangerous? No. Clara folded the deed. Your signatures make you dangerous. For the first time, Thorne's composure cracked. He spurred his horse closer. Chaitton's hand closed around the bridle before the animal reached the porch. The horse tossed its head. Chaitton held steady. Thorne looked down at him. 24 hours. Chaitton released the bridle. The riders turned. As they left, one of the men glanced back at the cabin with an expression that was not loyalty. It was worry. Clara waited until the dust settled. Then she looked at the deed again. 24 hours is not enough. Chaitton picked up his hinge. It is what we have. You cannot fight 5 men. I know. You say that very calmly. Panic uses time. She looked at him. What do we do? He nodded toward the writing desk visible through the doorway. You tell me. The answer placed the weight where it belonged. Not on his rifle. Not on his strength. On her work. Clara went inside. She unlocked the cedar chest. For the next 6 hours, she did not leave the desk except to refill the lamp. Clara began with the new restitution deed. She copied the legal description onto a clean sheet, then opened her notes from the county record book. The lines did not match. Thorne's paper shifted the northern boundary nearly half a mile west, enough to capture the spring and the stand of old pine above it. She found another discrepancy. The surveyor named on the deed had supposedly certified the boundary from Prescott. Clara had seen that name before. She searched through her copies until she found it on a freight receipt dated the same day, signed in person at Thorne's Valley office. Chaitton. He was at the table cleaning his Winchester. He came to the desk. She pointed. This man cannot have been in Prescott and the Valley on the same afternoon. Not if both signatures are genuine. Which one matters? The survey. Then prove where he was. How? Chaitton thought. Freight station keeps arrivals. Clara looked at the dark window. The station is 6 hours down and back in good weather. Yes. We have 24. Yes. She stood. I am going. No, her head snapped toward him. You just said. I am going. It is my evidence. It is my horse. Chaitton. He closed the rifle. If Thorne comes while I am gone, you can read. If he comes while you are gone, I can only tell him no again. That stopped her. He was right, and she resented it. You could tell him why the deed is false. He will not care. He may care if you know. He will care if other men know. Clara looked at the pages spread across the desk. Bring back anything with the surveyor's signature. Chaitton put on his coat. And find the mail writer. He waited. I am making 3 copies of everything. One stays here. One goes to the territorial attorney in Prescott. One goes to Judge Mercer in Tucson. You trust them? No. Good. She almost smiled. He left before midnight. Clara worked alone. The cabin sounds changed without him. The stove ticked louder. Wind against the wall sounded less like a weather and more like footsteps. Every creak from the workshop made her look up. She copied until her fingers cramped. Not prose. Evidence: Martha's statement. The auction lot sheet showing Thorne's clerk bought the Bennett commercial papers. The false debt note. The record book amendment. The restitution deed. Her own witnessed account of Vane's midnight meeting years earlier, clearly marked as memory rather than proven fact. She wrote a cover letter describing the pattern and requesting an immediate review of the disputed northern claim. At dawn, she sealed the first packet with wax. The second was halfway finished when she heard a horse. Her hand stopped. 1 rider, not 6. Martha appeared at the window. Clara unlocked the door. Martha entered carrying a basket. I brought eggs. You came before sunrise to bring eggs? No. Martha set down the basket. Thorne's men were drinking at the Copper Bell last night. One of them said he had been paid to frighten a squatter, not burn a woman alive. Clara's stomach tightened. Which man? Elias Boone, red beard, missing part of one ear. I saw him yesterday. He is not loyal. He is poor. That can still make a man dangerous. Yes. Martha reached into the basket beneath the eggs and produced a folded sheet. What is that? A copy of the High Mesa Company charter. Clara stared. How did you get it? Thorne's clerk boards with my cousin, Martha. I know what I said. Clara opened the paper. The shareholders were listed. Silas Thorne, Henry Pike, Jeremiah Vane. She read the third name twice. There it was. Vane had not simply mishandled the Bennett estate. He had benefited from its ruin. Clara sat. Martha's mouth tightened. I thought you should have that before I became sensible again. Clara reached for her hand. Thank you. Do not thank me until we are all alive tomorrow. By mid-morning, Chaitton returned. His horse was white with dried sweat. He brought a freight ledger page, copied by the station master, and a signed statement confirming the surveyor had been in the valley on the day he supposedly certified the Prescott filing. He had also found the mail rider. The rider would pass the lower fork at noon. Clara finished the packets. Chaitton drank water while she wrapped them in oilcloth. Martha watched from the table. You should both leave, she said. Clara tied the last string. And go where? Town? The fort. Anywhere with witnesses. Thorne has witnesses in town. Then the fort. Chaitton shook his head. The lower trail crosses High Mesa land. Martha sat down hard. Clara handed Chaitton the packet for Prescott. He put it inside his coat. I will meet the rider. Take Boone's Road 2 open. He pointed to a line on the rough map beside the desk. Old Wash. Martha leaned over. That wash is out in spring. It is winter. Clara looked at him. Come back. He met her eyes. I intend to. It was the nearest either had come to a promise. He left again. At noon, Clara carried the third packet to the back of the workshop. Beneath a removable floorboard was a cavity Chaitton used for rare tools and cash. She wrapped the packet in waxed cloth and placed it there. The second copy went into the cedar chest. Then she prepared the ledger, not to hide, to read. She marked pages with strips of cloth, company charter, survey discrepancy, false debt, Martha's testimony, auction purchase, facts in order, pressure in order. A story could move a heart. A record could move a court. She needed both. Chaitton returned just after 2. The rider has it. Clara closed her eyes for 1 second. Good. He rides with 2 others today. Better. They ate because Chaitton insisted. Cold bread, cheese, and 1 of Martha's eggs each. No one had appetite. The afternoon light began to thin. 24 hours approached. Chaitton went to the workshop and carried the unfinished bed frame into the bedroom piece by piece. Clara watched, baffled. Now? Yes. Thorne may be here in an hour. Yes. You choose now to move a bed? The workshop needs clear floor. For what? He set down a pine rail. For men with torches. The meaning chilled her. He was removing dry shavings, oil, and loose lumber from the most flammable part of the cabin. Clara helped. They carried buckets of water to the porch. They soaked blankets and stacked them near the walls. Chaitton cleared brush from the cabin perimeter. Martha filled every pot she could find. As the sun touched the western ridge, 6 riders appeared. This time, 2 carried pitch torches. Silas Thorne rode in front. Jeremiah Vane rode beside him. Clara felt her old fear arrive. Not as weakness, as memory in the body. Her palms went cold, her mouth dried. The yard seemed too bright. Chaitton stood on the porch with the Winchester held low. Martha stayed inside by the water buckets. Clara carried the ledger. Thorne stopped 20 yards away. Time! Chaitton did not answer. Vane looked at Clara. For 1 second she saw the executor from the auction, the man beneath canvas shade while her father's life was sold in crates. Then she saw his horse sweating from the climb, his collar dirty, his eyes fixed on her book. He was afraid. Thorne pointed toward the fence post. The restitution deed lay there with a pen. Sign no, Chaitton said. Thorne looked at the men with torches. 1 dismounted. Clara stepped off the porch. Before anyone burns anything, Elias Boone should know what he is being paid to protect. The red-bearded man looked sharply at her. Thorne's head turned. Clara opened the ledger. High Mesa Timber and Freight. Shareholders Silas Thorne, Henry Pike, Jeremiah Vane. Vane went pale. Thorne laughed too loudly. A company charter is not a crime. No, forgery is. She held up the copied survey. The survey attached to your claim was certified in Prescott on November 14th by William Harker. Thorne's face did not move. Clara lifted another page. On November 14th, William Harker signed a freight receipt in the valley at 2 in the afternoon. The station master confirmed it this morning. The man holding the torch glanced at Boone. Clara continued. The county property record did not contain your northern extension 8 days ago. Your filing appeared yesterday. It depends on a survey that could not have been performed as certified. Thorne's smile vanished. Vane spoke quickly. This woman has always been unstable. Clara turned to him. I also have the Bennett debt note you brought to this cabin. His mouth closed. My father's signature appears on a document dated during the final weeks of his illness. Martha Wilkes has sworn he could not reliably hold a cup at the time. The listed notary had been dead for 2 years. Martha came onto the porch. Her face was white, her voice was not. I signed that statement. Vane stared at her. You meddling old fool. Martha flinched. Clara saw it. Then Martha straightened. Yes, she said. I suppose I am. Boone lowered his hand from his holster. Thorne swore. None of this matters if the originals belong to the company. Clara had been waiting for that. She held the ledger against her chest. One complete copy went to the territorial attorney by mail rider at noon. Silence. Thorne looked toward the trail. Clara continued. A second copy is hidden. A third is in this house. Burning the cabin destroys nothing except property. One torch lowered. The other followed. Thorne's face changed. The performance dropped away. He was no longer a land baron. He was a man calculating distance to consequences. You are lying. Then burn it. The words surprised everyone, including Clara. She took another step into the yard. Burn the house. Burn my desk. Burn every page you can find. The packet is already traveling with witnesses. Chaitton's gaze shifted to her. Not warning. Recognition. Thorne turned in the saddle. Boone. Elias Boone looked at the torch in the other man's hand. I signed on to scare a squatter. You signed on for wages. Not hanging. Thorne reached for his pistol. Chaitton raised the Winchester. The click of the lever sounded small. Every horse in the yard felt it. Thorne froze. Chaitton's voice was quiet. Do not. Thorne's hand hovered. Vane whispered, Silas. The land baron slowly moved his hand away. Then he looked at Clara. You think paper will save you? No, she said. People reading it might. Thorne spat into the dust. He jerked his reins. Leave them. The hired men turned gladly. Vane remained 1 moment longer. His eyes went past Clara through the open cabin door, to the writing desk under the window, the desk he had laughed at, the desk he had tried to teach her she did not deserve. Clara understood then why its existence disturbed him so deeply. A person with a place to think was harder to erase. Vane looked back at her. What do you want? It was the first honest question he had ever asked. Clara thought of the house auction, the library, the burned pages, the false debts, the rosemary under his horse, the originals. His face tightened. All Bennett estate records still in your possession. All partnership accounts with High Mesa. Every note bearing my father's name. You cannot. I can describe exactly which records should exist. If they disappear now, that becomes part of the record too. He looked toward Thorne, who was already 50 yards down the trail. For the first time, Vane understood that Thorne would not protect him. His shoulders sagged. I will speak to counsel. Do that. Vane mounted fully and rode after the others. No one moved until the last hoofbeat faded. Chaitton lowered the rifle. Martha sat down on the porch step as if her knees had ceased to function. Clara remained in the yard holding the ledger. Her whole body began to shake. Chaitton crossed to her. He did not embrace her. He stood close enough that she could choose. Clara leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his chest. His arms came around her slowly. The wool of his shirt smelled of smoke, pine, and cold air. She held the ledger between them. Neither spoke. They stayed that way until her breathing became ordinary again. The territorial attorney did not arrive like justice in a story. No cavalry rode up the ridge. No judge appeared at dawn with handcuffs and a declaration. For 9 days nothing happened. That was almost harder. Clara woke every morning expecting riders. Chaitton checked the trail more often than he admitted. Martha returned to town because absence would draw questions, but she sent word through the Nelson boy whenever gossip changed. On the 3rd day, Jeremiah Vane's office closed. On the 5th, Henry Pike disappeared. On the 6th, Silas Thorne sent a man to the records office with instructions to withdraw the Northern Timber claim. The clerk refused because the territorial attorney had already placed a hold on the filing. Clara learned this from Martha in a note hidden inside a sack of potatoes. She read the sentence twice. Then she carried it to Chaitton. He was fitting the final side rail of the pine bed. Thorne tried to withdraw the claim. Chaitton tapped the rail into place with a mallet, and he cannot. Another tap. Good. That is all you have to say? He tested the joint. What should I say? I do not know. Something with triumph. Is it finished? No. Then triumph wastes time. Clara folded the note. You are impossible. Yes, she smiled. 2 days later, a deputy marshal and a clerk from Prescott rode to the cabin. The clerk was young, sunburned, and plainly unhappy about the mountain trail. He carried a leather case filled with papers. The deputy asked questions. Clara answered them. He asked Martha's statement again in her absence. Clara explained what she had witnessed and what she had not. He asked whether she had seen Thorne forge a signature. No. Did you see Vane forge one? No. Then why do you believe these instruments are false? Clara spread the documents across the writing desk. Because this notary was dead. Because this surveyor was 6 hours away from where he certified he stood. Because these amendments benefited the same company that bought my father's business papers. Because Vane, executor of the estate, was secretly a shareholder in that company. And because the dates do not fit my father's physical condition. The clerk took notes. The deputy glanced at Chaitton. What about the threat to burn the cabin? 6 men heard it, Clara said. So did Martha. Will they admit it? Elias Boone might. The deputy rubbed his jaw. He already did. Clara looked up. The man closed his notebook. Boone rode to Prescott before your packet arrived. Said he wanted his name separated from whatever Thorne was planning. Relief moved through Clara so sharply she had to grip the desk. The deputy continued. Your packet helped us know which questions to ask. That was all. No praise. No grand recognition. Just a practical fact. It meant more to Clara than praise would have. Before leaving, the clerk asked to inspect the cedar document chest. Chaitton unlocked it. The clerk looked at the construction. Fine box. Chaitton nodded. The man lifted an eyebrow. That desk yours too? Yes. The clerk ran a finger over the edge. My wife would kill for one. Chaitton looked at Clara. No, he said. She would write at it. The clerk blinked. Clara turned away to hide her smile. The investigation unfolded over winter. Thorne's power did not vanish at once. Men who owed him money defended him. Merchants complained that prosecution would ruin the freight business. One newspaper called the dispute a domestic quarrel expanded by racial agitation, which made Clara so furious she wrote a 7-page response and then, after sleeping, reduced it to 1 sharp page of documented corrections. The paper printed half. It was enough. Other widows came forward. A rancher produced a deed with the same dead notary. A storekeeper remembered Vane borrowing his stamp. 2 former High Mesa employees described backdated contracts. By spring, the territorial court froze several of Thorne's claims and ordered the Bennett estate records seized. Vane turned over 3 boxes. Clara and the Prescott clerk spent 2 days examining them at the county office. In the second box, she found her father's original account ledger. The true debt was substantial. It was not ruinous. There should have been money left after the sale of the South Pasture. Instead, unexplained transfers had gone to High Mesa. Clara stared at the page until the numbers blurred. She had imagined this moment for months. She expected rage. What came was grief. Her father had been careless. Vane had been dishonest. Thorne had been predatory. The truth did not cleanly divide the dead into innocent and guilty. Edward Bennett had trusted men he should not have trusted because he disliked the work of examining his own finances. His daughter had paid for that vanity. Clara copied the figures. Then she closed the book. Outside the records office, Chaitton waited beneath the awning with 2 cups of coffee. She took one. He was not blameless, she said. Chaitton leaned against a post. Your father? Yes. He waited. He signed things without reading them. Before he became ill, he borrowed too much. He believed Vane because Vane made tedious matters disappear. Chaitton drank his coffee. Clara looked at him. You could say something. You are saying it. He loved me. I know. He also failed me. Yes. The agreement hurt. It also relieved her. She did not have to turn her father into a saint to condemn the men who exploited him. She could write the whole truth. Back at the cabin that evening, she opened the ledger and began again. The manuscript changed. She removed speeches she had never heard anyone give. She crossed out passages that made herself braver than she had been. She restored the moments when she had frozen, lied, submitted, or misunderstood. She wrote Martha as afraid and courageous at once. She wrote Vane as greedy but not supernatural. She wrote Thorne as a man whose greatest power came from ordinary people deciding his money made resistance inconvenient. When she reached Chaitton, she stopped. For 3 days she wrote around him. The carpenter built a desk. The carpenter waited. The carpenter protected the house. All true. None enough. On the 4th evening, she found him carving the headboard. Juniper branches curved across the pine. Between them he had carved a line of water. Clara touched the pattern. Why water? Roots. You think of roots often. They keep things from leaving. Water moves. It also gives roots a reason to stay. She looked at him. The workshop lamp warmed one side of his face. I do not know how to write you. Chaitton set down the chisel. Good, she frowned. Good? You should not know too soon. That is not useful. I am not an account. No, accounts are easier. He wiped sawdust from the bench. Write what I do. That makes you sound like furniture with boots, better than making me noble. Clara stared. How did you know I used that word? You scratched through the paper, hard enough to shake the desk. She laughed. Then she became serious. The town treated you like a symbol before it treated you like a man. I do not want to do the same in the opposite direction. Chaitton nodded. Then do not. Very helpful, yes. She moved closer. He did not. Clara had grown familiar with that restraint. He never completed a distance she had not begun. She touched the back of his hand, his fingers turned under hers, callous against ink stain. I am not afraid of the bed anymore, she said. His gaze rose. I know. How? You stopped looking at it when you entered the room. She smiled faintly. I am still afraid of what it changes. Then it changes nothing tonight. The answer settled in her chest. She rested her forehead against his shoulder. For a long time they stood beside the unfinished headboard while the lantern hissed. The next morning, Chaitton finished the bed. He did not carry it into the bedroom alone. Clara took the footboard. They maneuvered the heavy pieces through the doorway together, laughing once when a post caught on the frame and neither could move without backing up. Your measurements, Clara said through clenched teeth. The doorway is old. You built the doorway. Then your angle is wrong. My angle? Yes. You are fortunate I have grown fond of you. That stopped both of them. The words had come without planning. Chaitton looked over the top of the footboard. Clara felt heat rise to her face. He said quietly, I am. No flourish, no demand for more. They shifted the bed and carried it through. When the last pine peg was driven, the bedroom looked different. The frame was large but not ornate. The carved juniper and water along the headboard echoed the twisted legs of the writing desk in the main room. Clara ran her hand over the smooth rail. On her first night in the cabin, she had imagined this object as proof that her body had been purchased. Now it meant something entirely different. Chaitton had waited until she no longer believed rest had to be earned. He laid a wool mattress over the slats. Then he stood back. Clara looked at the bed, then at him. You are still sleeping in the workshop? If you want. She shook her head. I do not. He did not move. Clara crossed the space between them. She took his hand. You told me the bed would be built when it meant rest. Yes, it does. That night there was no performance of debt. They spoke first. Not about Thorn. Not about Vane. About ordinary things. Whether the hens needed a new nesting box. Whether Martha's peaches were too sweet. Whether Chaitton's uncle had truly once slept through a bear outside his tent. When the lamp was blown out, Clara lay beside him, listening to the winter wind move along the roof. His hand rested open on the blanket between them. She placed hers in it. The silence held. Nothing was taken, nothing was owed. By dawn, the room finally felt inhabited rather than assigned. Spring came late to the ridge. Snow lingered beneath the north-facing rocks while the valley below had already turned green. Water ran loud in the wash. The Rosemary Vane's horse had pushed out new shoots from 2 damaged stems. One branch never recovered, but Clara left it tied to the stake until the wood went gray. She liked the honesty of it. Not everything healed. Some things simply grew around what had been lost. The court hearings began in April. Clara testified twice. The first time, Silas Thorne sat 10 feet away in a dark suit and looked at her as though staring hard enough might return her to the frightened woman outside the magistrate's office. It did not. She answered only what she knew. When Thorne's attorney asked whether her marriage to Chaitton had influenced her hostility toward respectable interests in the valley, Clara said, My marriage influenced where I live. The dates on those papers influenced my conclusions. A few people laughed. The judge did not, but he allowed the answer. Jeremiah Vane testified after her. He had aged in months. Under oath, he admitted purchasing shares in High Mesa while still serving as executor of the Bennett estate. He claimed he had believed the arrangement legal. He blamed Thorne for the altered deeds. Thorne's attorney blamed Vane for the false notes. Neither man appeared interested in loyalty. Once loyalty carried a sentence. The court voided the northern claim. Several Bennett estate transactions were reopened. Clara recovered money. Not the house, not the library, not the years. Money. The amount was enough to buy a small place in the valley if she wanted one. She brought the court letter home and placed it on the writing desk. Chaitton read the figure. Do you want to leave? Clara looked around the cabin. The stove needed blacking. One hinge squeaked. A draft still found the kitchen floor on hard winter nights. The west window had a scratch across one pane from the storm. The desk bore ink marks now. The marriage bed had a small dent in one rail where they had struck it, carrying in a water barrel during a roof leak. Nothing was perfect. Everything was theirs by choice. No. Chaitton folded the letter. What do you want to do with it? The money, yes. Clara considered. Buy the North Spring if the court releases it. It already feeds our land. I want the paper to agree. He nodded. And after that? She looked toward the workshop. You need a better roof over the timber stack. I do. Martha needs her own stove. Hers smokes. She will refuse. Then we will call it payment for testimony. She will still refuse. We will deliver it when she is not home. Chaitton almost smiled. And I want books. That brought a full smile, brief and rare. How many? Clara looked at the bare wall beside the desk. Enough to make you regret asking. By summer there were shelves. Not a library like her father's, with polished walnut and books purchased because a gentleman was expected to own them. These shelves held what Clara actually read. Territorial law, botany, poetry. Carpentry manuals Chaitton pretended were unnecessary and consulted after dark. A medical guide Martha borrowed and never returned. 3 novels. A battered dictionary. A book on irrigation. Clara bought blank paper in bulk. She continued the manuscript. At first, she believed she was writing only for herself. Then Martha asked to read the pages about the court. Clara hesitated. Martha sat at the kitchen table with spectacles low on her nose and read for an hour. When she finished, she wiped her eyes angrily. You made me sound frightened. You were. I was. You also came back. Martha closed the ledger. Keep that part. Clara did. A teacher from the valley read another section, then a newspaper editor, then a traveling salesman who had once worked in a print shop in New York. The manuscript moved farther than Clara did. 2 years after the auction, an envelope arrived from the east. Chaitton brought it in with the mail and placed it on the corner of the desk beside her coffee. He had built a small round coaster for the mug after noticing water rings on the pine. Clara opened the envelope with a kitchen knife. The publisher's letter praised the clarity of her Frontier account and asked whether she would accept revisions. Clara read the paragraph twice. Then she looked at the enclosed payment. For a moment she thought of Jeremiah Vane, not with triumph, with distance. Once a number in a ledger had decided whether she ate, where she slept, who controlled her future. Now another number sat on her desk. It was welcome. It was not power over her. Chaitton repaired a harness near the stove. Well, they want the book. He looked up. Do you? The question mattered more than the offer. Clara touched the manuscript. Yes. Then good. That is your entire reaction? You have been writing a book for 2 years. I was not certain anyone would publish it. I was. She narrowed her eyes. Why? People like to know what powerful men do when they think no one is keeping count. She laughed. The publisher wanted a title. Clara rejected 6. The 7th came while she was oiling the desk. A house with a place to speak. She wrote it on a scrap and left it overnight. In the morning it still felt true. The book did not make her famous overnight. It sold modestly at first. Then a newspaper in St. Louis reviewed it. A women's reading circle ordered copies. A territorial reform group quoted the sections on fraudulent deeds. Letters began to arrive. Some praised her. Some called her ungrateful. One man wrote 3 pages explaining why women were too emotional to record history accurately. Clara filed that letter under the leg of a wobbly cabinet until Chaitton repaired the cabinet and accidentally deprived it of purpose. Other letters mattered. A widow in Colorado wrote that she had begun keeping copies of every mortgage paper after reading Clara's account. A schoolteacher in Kansas asked permission to read a passage to her older girls. A young woman in New Mexico wrote only 1 sentence. I bought a notebook. Clara kept that one in the desk drawer. Years passed. The cabin changed by inches. A second room was added, then a larger pantry. The garden spread beyond the porch. The North Spring received a stone trough. Juniper saplings were planted along the wash, where old trees had been cut before Chaitton reclaimed the slope. Some survived, some did not. Martha grew slower and more willing to admit when she wanted company. On cold Sundays she came up the ridge and sat near the stove, reading whatever Clara left on the table. She never apologized for it. Silas Thorne lost the High Mesa Company and most of his political influence. He did not lose everything. Men like him rarely did. He moved east after another civil suit and was eventually mentioned in newspapers less often than the weather. Jeremiah Vane served a short sentence for falsifying estate records and spent his later years keeping books for a hotel in another territory. Clara heard this from someone else. She did not write to him. There was no final speech to give. The record existed. That was enough. One autumn evening, nearly 10 years after Clara first climbed the ridge, she sat on the porch beside Chaitton. They had spent the afternoon planting 3 young junipers above the wash. Her hands were muddy. His left knee hurt in cold weather now, and he denied it with such consistency that denial had become a household joke. The light sank behind the mountains. Chaitton leaned back against the wall. The smallest one will need a stone windbreak. I already wrote it down. Of course. Clara looked at her fingers. There was dirt beneath the nails. A faint line of ink crossed one knuckle from the morning's work. Once she had scrubbed until she bled trying to remove such marks. Now she barely noticed them. Inside the open doorway, the writing desk stood beneath the west window. Time had darkened the pine. Her wrists had worn 2 smooth patches into the surface. A black crescent marked the place where the inkwell had once tipped. The little drawer stuck during dry summers. Chaitton offered to fix it every year, and Clara refused because she had learned exactly how to lift and pull at the same time. Beyond it, through the bedroom doorway, the pine bed remained solid. The carved water line along the headboard had grown darker with oil and touch. Desk first, bed later. The order no longer felt like a lesson. It was simply the order in which their life had become possible. Chaitton looked toward the new trees. The roots are deep enough. You always say that. Usually true. Not always. No. Clara rested her shoulder against his. They sat without speaking. The old silence returned around them, but it had changed its meaning over the years. There had been the silence of the auction, when strangers decided the value of her life. The silence of the magistrate's office, when she signed a contract because every other road seemed closed. The silence of the empty bedroom, when she mistook the absence of demand for rejection. The silence of the workshop, full of the plane moving over wood. The silence before she wrote her mother's name. The silence in the yard while men held torches. The silence after they rode away. And this one, evening. Wind through juniper, a kettle beginning to murmur on the stove inside. Chaitton's boot touching hers. Nothing to prove. No one to persuade. Clara thought of the first ledger, thrown into trash beside an auction porch, because a man had decided her words had no commercial value. She thought of the black book now stored in the cedar chest, its pages copied and bound, some preserved in a territorial archive, because they had become evidence in a case people still cited. She thought of all the meaning a thing could gather after someone declared it worthless. Coffee? Chaitton asked. In a minute. He stayed seated. Clara smiled. He had learned that in a minute sometimes meant 10. The last light moved across the porch boards. At the Bennett auction, Clara had believed everything she owned could be divided into 2 piles. What she carried and what was taken. She knew better now. There were things no inventory could measure. Attention, memory, choice. The patience to wait until a person could recognize rest, the stubbornness to put truth on paper before someone stronger decided truth belonged to him. Chaitton had not rescued her by building a desk. He had done something more difficult. He had recognized a part of her she was prepared to abandon and made room for it without demanding that she use the room. She had still been the one who sat down. She had still been the one who opened the ledger. She had still been the one who wrote, and when the bed finally came, she had walked toward that too. The distinction mattered. It was the difference between being given a life and choosing one. The air cooled. Clara rose. Her knees were stiffer than they used to be. Chaitton stood beside her. They went inside. She stopped at the desk to close the inkwell. A new page waited beneath her pen. Tomorrow she would fill it. Tonight she left it blank. Not because she had nothing to say, because silence at last belonged to her too.